Today on the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, episode number 5-1. Yes, 5-1. You know what? I have a very special treat for you today. I'm going to talk about everyone's famous neighbor. Yes, Mr. Rogers. You know, thinking back is, the trolley, Lady Elaine, brings back a lot of special childhood memories. Well, today my guest, Benjamin Wagner, the creator of the film Mr. Rogers and Me, along with his brother, Chris Wagner, we talk about the movie, and also we'll talk about how Benjamin was affected as a person, a dad, and a husband from actually meeting Mr. Rogers. Next on the podcast. Let's do this.
Welcome to the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, a podcast about a journey of discovery and conversations about not sitting on the sideline of life. Let's get involved. Here's host Joe Foley.
Welcome to the podcast. Hey, my name is Joe Foley, and I really want to say thank you for being here. I know as a dad and parent, and just being a busy person, we're busy people, and if this is your first time, welcome. I know this stuff's not easy, and I don't claim to be easy or anything like that because, sometimes it's a trial by error or fly on the seat of our pants or just trying to figure this out one day at a time. Hey, what I want to do is I want to build a sense of community. Hey, I want to talk to you, or you talk to me. We'll talk to each other, actually. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts, I can't say the other word, or on your favorite podcast app. Also, SpeedPipe, if you're looking on a computer, right-hand corner. Yeah, that one right there. Leave a message. I'd like to hear from you. Or join our Facebook group, nosittingonthesideline.com/Facebook group. And you can meet up with new people, talk to people, and start a conversation. Maybe you had experience what we're going to talk about today, well, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, because really think of it, it's an iconic TV show. And me as an adult, I remember it, being my age and growing up, and those are the things and it's interesting because they talk about divorce, he talked about everything, and it's kind of cool to watch. It's a journey. I'm on a journey just like you, trying to figure this stuff out one day at a time. Next up, my conversation with Benjamin Wagner, writer, producer, the director of the film Mr. Rogers and Me. Ben and his brother both worked on creating this film. Benjamin and Chris started this project about 10 years ago. At that time, they're on a journey. It was kind of cool. Benjamin worked in media for 25 years, worked at MTV, also an aspiring musician. We talk about what is his first encounter of meeting Mr. Rogers. And Benjamin mentioned how authentic, present he was. It's almost awestrucking, I guess, to be with somebody in the room like that and just their total attention's on you. And it's kind of cool. The film won many awards, like the Heart Film Festival, Crystal Heart winner, and also won the award at the Flagstaff and Film Festival for Best Documentary. We touched on topics like divorce, investing in your kids. The audio might be a little weird in the beginning due to a Skype issue. And also around the 21 mark, you may not notice it, but the 2 separate days in recording because, my computer decided and went boop. So Benjamin brings a lot to this interview and a lot of great stories about his experience about Mr. Rogers being his neighbor. So then how much of a big influence in his life he was. So let's jump right in. Welcome to the podcast, Benjamin.
Thank you. It's like to be here.
It feels like I know you because I watched the movie a couple of times now, and then it's kind of fun. But what is one thing that you take away from this film, like you meeting Mr. Rogers, knowing him, and being his neighbor? What is one thing you take away?
I mean, it's a zillion, but I guess the thing that's top of mind is I now have a shorthand, a very simple and elegant couple of words, phrase to anchor how I spend my time every day, or I try to, right? Like, I'm listening to the show, like we're human. You talk about that, and that's great. I'm a dad. I have 2 daughters. I blow it occasionally. I'm a husband. I'm a nincompoop occasionally, but I can aspire to depth and simplicity. I can aspire to being, radically present. I can aspire to appreciating silence, right? So I didn't have the same language that I had that I have now prior to making this film, though I had the same aspirations and the same interests. And what the process of making the film and meeting Mr. Rogers in the first place gave me was kind of a toolkit to navigate an increasingly, shallow and complex world.
I didn't. We jumped right into the about Mr. Rogers, but a little bit about yourself. What do you do? What is your daytime job?
Yeah, I have been in media for 25 years. I was, as a kid, I wanted to be a newspaper writer and the editor of the high school paper and wrote for the local paper. And went to Syracuse University, where, as I think I mentioned, I have a degree in creative writing, degree in newspaper, and I've basically been in the media business. Lifetime Television, Rolling Stone Magazine, MTV, was MTV News for 18 years. And I'm in social media now for the sake of simplicity, and have been for about 4 years.
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting working for MTV and the Rolling Stone. That might have been interesting.
Oh, absolutely. It has been, I moved to New York City with my brother in 1995, and I certainly didn't have any intention of staying very long. It was overwhelming to me. That first day we walked around the block in our new apartment, and here I am pushing 24 or 5 years later. It's all been unexpected, but that's life, right? Preparedness and luck and timing and, work ethic and grit and all that. But MTV News was a heck of a run. Did a lot of video music awards. It's funny. I actually got to write about Mr. Rogers on MTV News, which was fun to have a story go viral on social media on MTV News about Mr. Rogers, which seemed kind of oxymoronic or sort of entities in opposition, which is I think was one of the things that made me making the movie at that time interesting, and what made it interesting when I called people and said, "Hey, would you talk to me?" Because ostensibly MTV feels incongruous with PBS. I had a button a long time ago, like, the kind of button you put on a jean jacket that said, a PBS mind in an MTV world. And so that binary, that opposition was already set up for me even before I met Mr. Rogers and before I even thought about any of this stuff. It's been, it's surprising to be where I am in my life, to be in my, turning the corner in my mid 40s. It's surprising to be happily married and the father of two. It's surprising to know I had a career in New York City for 25 years, but that's like, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, right?
Exactly. And it's always interesting because you never know how things are going to turn out. I have a son and I'm like 4 years old, and we watch, your young daughters, and we watched, Daniel Tiger. And I know that's kind of
sure,
like Mr. Rogers, like, I don't want to say spinoff, but I'm like, all the stuff that I watched as a kid, I'm like, let's watch Mr. Rogers. That's not Daniel Tiger, but that's where Daniel Tiger came from. It's just fun to watch. And I like watching Mr. Rogers himself and the TV show. What is one memory of you? Did you watch it as a kid? Did you have any memories as a kid watching it?
Oh yeah, in our house, it's interesting. So I wasn't I've met in the course of the last 15 or so years a lot of people who are rabidly enthusiastic, crazy fans from their childhood, and I wasn't that. Though I was not allowed to watch much else. We didn't watch much television at all. And when we did, it tended towards PBS, Electric Company, Mr. Rogers, and later 3-2 and Contact. So I had a fairly limited exposure, but I remember all that stuff. I remember the episode where he talks about the fish dying, and I remember feeding the fish in the Crown Factory. Like everybody else, all that stuff. But my, I got to be honest, my sort of galvanizing moment was meeting him in real life. The moment where I went, and I don't even, I think it was, I've thought about this a lot, right? I've been asked this a lot. This is a human being who just was present and authentic and engaged in a way that I just hadn't experienced before. And I've spoken. I mean, I've met a lot of people who were on camera, from, I don't know, Bono to Lady Gaga to Snooki to, Barack Obama to Hillary Clinton so I had some exposure. Certainly not sitting in their living room as I got to do with Mr. Rogers, but he was just striking in his presence. And I think it's, funny, this film premiered in 2010 and then went wide in 2012. I mean, think of all that's changed in media since then, specifically the rise of the iPhone, which really has been in the last 8 to 10 years, the sort of ubiquity of the handheld sort of mobile device, and the rise of social media, and screens everywhere. I live in New York City. There's screens on every street corner now. Big screens, that, are like Google co-brands. So yeah, it really is about his radical sort of authenticity and sense of self and presence that, I don't think I could have ever put language to as a kid, but is what was so striking as a young adult. I guess 30 is an adult. I'm an adult.
Yeah, I think 30 is an adult.
I'm still working on it, Joe.
Yeah, I'm the same boat as you. I'm in my early 40s. So, I hate to say early, but I go 4 plus 3 is 7. Oh man, I got 7 years from 450.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting to listen to him. And I was recently, actually today, before we had the interview today, and I was watching a YouTube video, an interview with David Letterman back in the 80s. And he brought out the Letterman sweater, and his presence. You just want to, just talking to David Letterman. And it's like, look at him. He looks kind. He just looks kind.
Yeah. And he was, and I think Dave Letterman, I can remember watching Dave Letterman in college, and it was really, truly edgy and oddball and still is in his own way. But he even seems to disarm David in some way, right? He even seems to manage to sort of remove some degree of Letterman's, like, I don't know what it is, like cool, hip, smart aleck attach. It's pretty powerful stuff, right? And I don't know, there's just a few figures that I can think of off the top of my head who seem to have that capability. Like Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu. I mean, I'm sure there are others that we don't know, but it's a real deal, man. I'll tell you a funny story that's not in the movie, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but it's a good illustration. As I mentioned, I am a singer-songwriter. So, in fact, one of the things my mom thought that Mr. Rogers and I would have in common, and we enjoyed talking about him. So the day I met him, I went over to talk to my guitar, or the day after I met him, to play him a couple of songs. And I was about to put out a record called Crash Site that was supposed to come, the subtext of this whole record was my parents' divorce and this sort of, let's say, metaphor of plane crashes and sort of catastrophe as a narrative sort of connection. And I was walking to the post office on the morning of September 11, 2001, a week after I met Mr. Rogers. And I'd heard on the radio that something happened downtown in New York. I live in New York City, and I'd look up and I see the towers. You could see them from the end of my street. So I think to myself, this is not a good time to drop 350 postcards into the mailbox that have a plane crashing on the front. I didn't have any idea what was happening yet. Fast forward 2-3 weeks later, I had said to myself, well, I can't put this record out as is. So I literally said to myself, what would Mr. Rogers do? And I go, Mr. Rogers would find a way to make this a positive. So I re-recorded the title track as a benefit and did a benefit show instead of a record release show to raise money for the United Way. So I get done with this benefit show at a place called the Mercury Lounge here in New York City. True story, dude. So bananas. I walk out into the bar to get a beer after playing, and the bartender says, oh, you got a message. Some guy named Fred Rogers called to say good luck. I mean, dude, who does that? Like, who does that? And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And I mean, he found the number to the Mercury Lounge in New York City. Like, I mean, so Joe, I mean, if that ain't the real deal, if something special isn't happening there, and we could do a series every week on 10 people a week that had a similar experience. I mean, I get emails every day, or I see posts from people every day that are similar. And so, you asked me earlier what I take away. I take away the reminder that every and this is what we lead the movie with, right? That every meeting with another person leaves a lasting impression. And so what happens if we remember that at the start, and instead of being defensive or cagey or distant or disengaged, we do our best to be present and empathetic and thoughtful and a great listener? Like what happens then? Like think about the transformational capacity we have with each other. And that's what he did for me. And that's pretty powerful stuff.
How does it affect you as a dad, though? I mean, how does it affect you as being a father yourself? Now you're a dad of.
Yeah, I'm just laughing because what it does is it holds up a bar that is so high that I can't possibly, I mean, when we premiered at the Nantucket Film Festival in 2010, which was a week after my daughter Maggie was born, and not a joke, Joe, the day before Father's Day. So we screened well, it doesn't matter, but like we screened 2 nights, on a Saturday and on a Sunday, and Sunday was Father's Day. And John Rogers invited us to come over to the Crooked House, which is Greg's place in Nantucket. John is his son, one of his 2 sons. And so John was telling us about what he was like as a dad and trying to give us a little context, and of course, him being a little reasonable. But generally speaking, he was like, what you saw is what you got. Like, we're the same guy. But I mean, honestly, I just do my best, just like any other dad. They know that they know who he is. They know I've made a movie about him. They haven't seen it because I generally speaking don't think a couple of little kids want to watch people talking. At the same time, I also try and keep an eye on what television they watch. It's spring break for them this week, and I have let them watch a little bit of Daniel and a little bit of Mr. Rogers in the morning. Some mornings, Joe, I just say, because they'd rather watch Daniel. It's a little quicker, it's animated, and I'll be like, nope. It's Mr. Rogers or nothing. and they'll take Mr. Rogers over nothing. And they're enthralled. And I love it when Elsie, my youngest, will talk back to the screen, which was part of his intent, right? To ask a question to the screen, leave a few minutes for a young person to respond. It's just so great. But I don't know. I guess I figured you'd ask this question, so I thought about it. I mean, above all, I will find myself on Sunday mornings reading the Sunday paper while they're playing on the floor at their little table, and I'll stop and think, dude, why don't you just go color with them? So, and that I feel like is a direct result of trying to remember what a kid would want from me, and some of the things that I've learned by watching him in his show. Sitting on the floor at their level, putting his eyes at their eye level. I mean, my kids are a little older now, and an 8-year-old in New York City is pretty sophisticated. But like nothing beats sitting and coloring. The other morning we just sat with magic markers at their table and just drew stuff like rainbows. And, I mean, that, I guess above all, I was walking home from sledding with them today in Central Park, and my youngest was walking really slow because she was tired, right? Sledding's tiring for a kid. And there's a part of me that wanted to rush home, meet my wife, make dinner. And I thought, just slow down, Ben. Just slow down. Like, go at their pace. And I feel like those are 2 examples of things I'm not sure I would be as aware of or capable of were it not for him and my exposure to him.
Well, it's funny is every time I remember my memory of it, I always, when in the beginning, the credits roll in the beginning and he's going up the street to his house, I always wanted to see if Fred Rogers be walking up the street. I know it's not real, but when you're a little kid, you have that, the imagination runs wild. Or when you see the trolley going through the little tunnel, going, hey, you think where's the trolley going? Where's the other end of that? And it was a great show. It was a great show, and you always wonder if he'd run around at Carnegie Sweaters.
I don't remember the number. My friend over at the what does he call it? The neighborhood archive. Did some painstaking sort of data exercise where he logged the color of every sweater over every episode, which he has now illustrated and it hangs in his living room. But, it was well considered television, right? At a time when, we're still at the time where generally speaking, the lowest common denominator. And, I met him at the height of Jersey Shore prior. I don't know. It was right around that time, right? Maybe it was prior. maybe we put the movie out around that time, but I just remember always being so ambivalent about the kind of junk food culture that we lived in. And that, he worked with educators, and then, he was a ordained minister. I mean, he surrounded himself with experts. This was not slapdash, right? It was all well considered in terms of what is the educational and psychological capability of our audience right now, like, and how do we meet them where they are and give them the best equipment they can have to, be the best humans they can be. And I don't think any of those considerations go into, most media, and that's what I've always wrestled with, and what I found so admirable is, I ask myself all the time, like, why am I here? What good is this stuff that I'm making? And I love music, so that counts for something. When I was a kid, Rolling Stone magazine was one of my mechanisms for coping with a confusing world, and imagining myself as a performer, and then eventually learning to perform myself, and more importantly, songwrite as a mechanism to understand what I was going through. I mean, that was useful stuff. But, helping millions of young people become deeper, more substantive and thoughtful humans that's some legit work right there, right? That is some good life's work.
Well, you mentioned in the beginning that you're from a divorced family, and you were trying to tell Mr. Rogers and myself, coming from a divorced family and I'm a divorcee myself. How did you have a conversation with him? Did you mention it to him? And what was this conversation?
I mean, really, Joe, it's at the heart of the whole thing. Meaning, it's funny. My old, I've never told anyone this, even I don't think my brother. My old manager at MTV. This guy is a great television producer and a really caring soul. And he was one of the first people to watch the film and give me notes. And he said to me, I really want to hear more about the divorce and how you felt, and how you sort of transformed it throughout the making of this film. And Chris and I talked about the idea of how hard do we hit various points. My brother Chris and Chris and I made the film almost single-handedly. The credits have lots of people in it, but generally speaking, it was me and Chris. And we decided ultimately to leave a lot of things as subtext and let viewers take away sort of what they needed from the film. But the divorce is at the heart of it, because when I met him, again, I was about to put out a record that was basically all about the divorce, which, like, let me be honest with you, man. I got like 18 records on Spotify, and most of them touch that subject in some manner or another, right? Like, you don't experience that and not have, it's one of 2 or 3 profound traumas in my life. I mean, it undermines a whole set of, childhood norms and expectations, right? So I don't know whether my mother had set him up, i.e., I doubt it. I mean, my mother had met him prior, obviously, on Nantucket, and called me and said, "You should come to Nantucket. You'll never believe who my neighbor is." And I did. So I don't know how much he knew. I know my mom had dinner with him, so I'm sure he had asked her these kinds of questions. But basically, within, I don't know, Joe, 15 minutes of meeting him, he said, "So tell me about your parents' divorce, or tell me about your father, and tell me about your parents' divorce." And it was so direct and disarming and thoughtful, and I felt so, as I say in the film, safe and comfortable with him, that it was almost difficult not to just start crying and want to, like, crawl into his lap and be like, "Well, let me tell you," and that was powerful. And he was a terrific listener. And I kind of feel like that was the transformational moment for me, where I was like, "Gosh, this guy is something else."
Well, I guess this is a good transition here. I guess, what are some of the people that you interview? What was the one of your favorites?
They were all amazing in their own way, and in most cases came about kind of serendipitously, and in surprising manner. I mean, even the fact that we got Tim Ressert to speak to us was kind of amazing. And it was like a process of discovery, like a journey, where I'd be like, "Oh, Chris, I remember reading an article in the newspaper in Nantucket, written by Tim Russert's wife, Maureen. We should try and get Tim Russert to talk about what it was like to be his neighbor on Nantucket, and managed to do so, and have since become friends with Luke and Maureen. And Maureen, as it ends up, who wrote this great piece, was a writer for Vanity Fair, was one of the first females to write for Newsweek, wrote for Rolling Stone. So, like, it opened this universe up of interesting people who are, like Susan Stamberg. I mean, this woman is like an institution in public radio, right? Linda Ellerbee, just a character, and has just been there and done that. So, like, there were all these moments where, the crew is my brother and me. I mean, Chris and I would basically be like, the way we pitched people would be, just give us 15 minutes, we'll be in and out. Of course, it never happened that way, but you'd intend for it to. But I think Amy Hollingsworth was critical to the movie, and also still a dear friend. We talk pretty regularly, and Tim Madigan. I mean, this was crazy synchronicity where I think somebody forwarded me an article about this guy who wrote a book, and then I look into the book, and it ends up that the guy's going to be speaking literally, Joe, a block and a half from my brother's apartment, like 3 blocks from my apartment. My brother lived in the 83rd and West End. I lived at 80th in Columbus on the west side of Manhattan. It's like, Tim was literally reading in between our apartments. So that was special, just for that kind of like randomness. And then we just become, he's what you see on camera. In fact, if you remember in the film, he says something as we hug goodbye. He goes, here comes the hug. Because we had joked, I said, this isn't going to be one of those things where you interview somebody on camera and you develop a rapport that is like this on-camera rapport, which happens. You forge a quick relationship. This is something a little with greater longevity, and it has been. I talked to Tim, a couple of days ago, and his story is both massively personal. Right. He's really honest with us. And I'm not sure how many times he had told this story out loud at that point, because he was just beginning, basically, quote unquote, the press tour on the book. Because you can really feel it. Right. But that's him. But at the same time, it's like, as I said earlier, it's super universal, because so many people, emailed me or sent me messages on our Facebook page or whatever, telling brief stories about their experience with Mr. Rogers and how it changed them, right? And so that they're all pretty special in their own way. Tim and Amy are the people who I continue to keep up with on the reg, and Maureen and her son Luke to some degree as well, which is pretty cool. At the same time, when we premiered the film, like, everywhere we went, but they would come out and help. This was grassroots, Joe. Like, it's on PBS, and we licensed it and everything afterwards. We had no idea. We just made the movie in our free time with our own money because we wanted to, and we felt really strongly about, doing something that mattered. So when I say we did premieres, it was like, we would literally call like the local library in Nantucket and be like, we'll bring the movie if you'll give us a screen and you can keep the money. We did that all over America for 2 years. So anyway, it is the save my children and my wife the most important thing I've done with my life and my time, and I'm pretty lucky for that.
Well, you talk about Tim Russ's thing, and if you don't mind me telling with a quick story, and it's in the movie, I don't want to ruin it for people, but the one thing about Mr. Rogers, he was at a party, and he has enough clout he could mingle with the bigwigs or the important people there, but he chose to be with the kid, Russ's son. I'm like, that blew me away.
Yeah. It says it all, right? And moreover, like, to do something creative with him, right? Like, if you remember, they made a clock out of a paper plate. Mm-hmm. God bless. Maureen's like, I scoured the attic. I couldn't find the paper plate clock, yeah. And I mean, I just think that was his story, that was his mission. He understood the value of investing, in investing time. It's funny, when we thought about our kids in school, my wife and I, our whole thing was like, let's just do the best we can for them as young as we can, because if we can just inculcate a real love of learning and a real passion for going to school, even if we can't go to the best school, or if we end up in some other situation, if you could just give a kid a passion for learning and curiosity, right? That's like the best, right? And I think Fred understood, like, if you plant seeds and you listen and you validate, right? Because a lot of times I think adults spend their time, not on purpose, just by accident, telling kids what they should be feeling or what they should be doing, as opposed to saying, like, I mean, you remember being 5? Like, the world was huge and everything was impactful, right?
Exactly.
Everything was massive, and your scope and your perspective is minuscule, as was referenced by my daughter 10 minutes ago when I put her to bed. She's like, "You're the best daddy in the whole world." And I'm like, well, that may be true, but there are lots of daddies, and probably a lot of them are pretty awesome.
It's fun when they say the nice thing. You're like, oh man, it melts your heart, and you're like, what do you want? What do you want me? What do you want?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, she just wanted to not go to bed.
I love them. I love the kids. I guess wrapping up. Final thoughts about Mr. Rogers himself and being a dad. I mean, I don't know if your thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, we kind of end the movie with. The movie ends with me. The movie ends with me just about to become a dad, right? And I put that in on purpose because he couldn't possibly have known that all along. But the idea that, there's, I guess, an extenuation of what I was saying a second ago, which is investing in a kid and really helping a young person understand that their feelings have value and that their behavior towards the other has value, and that being an iota of kindness can unleash a hurricane of love. Like, if you just consider those facts, right? If you consider those little tidbits or morsels or seeds, to me, that's the greatest gift of all that I had. In some ways, there's life before meeting Fred Rogers and life after meeting Fred Rogers. And, in terms of my own fatherhood, he equipped me minimally to be better at it. As we said earlier, like, I struggle all the time, but I just try and do what he did, which is just try and listen well and say, I hear you, I get it. And I mean, that's kind of all we need from each other, right? Somebody to listen and say, I understand, I understand, or I feel the same way too, or I felt the same way too. And you're not crazy for that. And so in a lot of ways, in every way, it's an experience and a gift that keeps on giving, and that I expect my kids will not only benefit from in their lives, but will also make them better to those around them. And that is, I think, what empowered or enabled him to be who he was in that way. Actually, I don't think it was him calculating, if I'm just really good to people, then they'll be really good to each other. I don't think he could help it. But if you just imagine the ramifications of one person being good to one other person, and that other person being good to someone else, and the sort of exponential value of that, which is kind of where we end the movie, right? Like, what happens if, we all just try and be a little kinder to the toll taker, or the guy at the deli, or, the guy I bumped into on the subway, instead of shooting him a dirty look, being like, excuse me, man, or like letting someone on or off the elevator first, I don't know. I feel like that stuff adds up, and now more than ever, a couple of random acts of kindness can go a long way.
It's almost like a chain reaction in a way. It's like a chain reaction.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Right. Like fusion. Yeah. And again, I just think the world is a increasingly fast-paced, complex, distracted, attention starved place. So maybe the best thing we can do on the personal level, right? If you can't change the world, not everyone's going to be, president or, not everyone's Desmond Tutu, but we can just be a tiny bit kinder to each other, friend and stranger alike, neighbor and non-neighbor alike. I call everybody neighbors when we're walking around in the city. So that my kids just remember that we're kind of all in this together. And at the end of the day, the earth is pretty darn small in the scheme of things. So probably we ought to be good to each other.
Well, wrapping, I guess, on where they can find you, where they can connect to you with a movie and stuff like that.
The film airs on PBS stations around the country. It's available on iTunes and Amazon and sort of all the major download to own and rental services. And it's available at PBS's download to own site. You can buy the DVD there. The worst case scenario, come to MrRogersandMe.com, MISTER. A lot of people write MR Rogers. It's MISTER, right? Mr. spelled out. And I'm on Facebook, same thing, Mr. Rogers and Me. Come say hi. I'm pretty good at talking, as you've gathered.
Well, all the links will be in the show notes, and I want to say thank you, Benjamin, for being on the podcast tonight, and I really do appreciate it.
Hey, man, what a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that's all I have for this episode. Thank you for joining me on the No City on the Sideline Dad podcast. And also I want to thank Benjamin Wagner for being a guest on the podcast. You can find more about Benjamin over it and about the movie and everything else over at MrRogersandMe.com. You can find all the show notes for this episode over at NoCityOnTheSideline.com/51. Please comment on the podcast. I'd like to hear your memories of what we talked about today, like Mr. Rogers. What was your favorite part as a kid growing up? And do you remember? And did it have an effect in your life? All my contact information is NoCityOnTheSideline.com/contact. If you have a second, leave a comment in the show notes. Continue the conversation. Leave a message. Speed pipe in the corner and red corner like we talked at the beginning. Also, head over to your podcast app of choice to leave a rating and review for the show. Mr. Rogers left a lasting impression on many young children and adults' lives. Many famous people. You know what's funny? He can go into a room and disarm people basically with his kindness. It's an awe experience. People that me and you would think, wow, these are celebrities. And when they see Mr. Rogers, they make him he makes them starstruck. He was an awesome man. He'd be sadly missed. This great quote, I think, from Mr. Rogers: the greatest gift you ever give is your honest self. Be who you are. Don't, be your honest self. Well, until next time, take care. God bless. Give your kids a hug. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates of the show and helpful and useful tips. This has been a production of Foley 42 Media.